and welcome back to another deep dive with me. Today we're going to be exploring something truly fascinating. The possibility that your red might not be my red. You know what I mean? We're going to be diving into some cutting edge research from iScience, and trust me, this is one that is really going to make you think.
Color perception. That's a good one. I've always uh, I've always been so fascinated by how subjective something so seemingly objective can be.
I know, right? I mean, we all learn colors as kids, right? You point to a fire truck and everybody agrees it's red. But this research is really suggesting that our internal experience of that redness might actually be totally different. And they even use this super cool technique called unsupervised alignment to kind of investigate this. But we'll get to that in a bit.
Unsupervised alignment. Okay, that sounds intriguing, but maybe before we get too technical, we should sort of like take a step back, and just kind of like start with the basics. Like, what are we actually trying to understand here?
Okay, yeah, good point. So this whole deep dive is revolving around this concept of qualia structures, which basically means how our sensory experiences are structured in our minds, right? Think of it like a
Mm.
map, okay? Each color is like a location on that map, and then like the distances between them represent how similar or different those colors feel to us.
Oh, okay. I think I see. So like my personal like map of color could have like red and orange like really close together, while yours might have them, further apart, even though we both call them by the same name.
Exactly. And so by analyzing these like individual maps that everybody has, we can kind of start to figure out if we're all actually experiencing color in the same way, or if there are like these subtle or, maybe not so subtle differences between us. And this research took a really interesting approach to exploring this. They actually ran this massive online experiment.
Okay, so in my mind, I'm picturing like a bunch of people just staring at computer screens, just like trying to describe colors. What did they actually do in this experiment?
Yeah, so they had hundreds of participants and they made sure to include both people with like typical color vision and people with various types of color blindness. And each person was shown like pairs of colors and they were asked to rate how similar they looked to them.
Interesting. So by comparing the similarity ratings of all these different people, they could start to map out those individual qualia structures that we
Yeah.
were talking about.
Exactly. And that's where this fancy unsupervised alignment technique comes in. Now, to be honest, I was a bit lost on this part, so I'm hoping you can kind of like break it down for us a little bit.
Yeah, happy to. So think of it like you're trying to match up two maps of the same city, but like you don't know if they use the same street names, right?
Mm.
Unsupervised alignment is basically like finding the best fit between those maps, just based on purely the relationships between the locations.
Yeah.
You know, which in our case would be the colors. So it doesn't assume that everybody's red corresponds to the same internal experience.
So it's like solving a puzzle where you have like all the pieces but no picture on the box to guide you. You just got to figure out how they fit together based on their shapes.
Yes, that's a fantastic analogy.
Yeah.
That's precisely what makes this method so powerful.
Yeah.
It lets us compare people's color experiences without making any assumptions about how they label those experiences.
Okay, so they've got this massive data set of color similarity ratings and this cool algorithm to analyze it. What did they actually find?
Well, first, the good news, when they compared the color qualia structures within groups of people with typical color vision, right? Like they found remarkably good alignment, meaning their maps basically matched up.
Okay, so people with similar color vision seem to experience color pretty similarly, makes sense. But what about the folks with color blindness? Did their maps also align?
Yeah, that's where it gets even more interesting. So the researchers found that the qualia structures could also be really effectively aligned within groups of people with similar types of color blindness. So even though their color vision was different, their internal color maps still seem to share like a common structure.
Wow. So even if their perception of specific colors is different, the way that they relate those colors to each other might be consistent.
Right.
That's pretty cool, but I have a feeling there's a twist coming. You mentioned that my red might not be your red.
You're catching on. So things took a bit of a turn when they tried to compare the color qualia structures between the color typical and color atypical groups. And this is where it gets really interesting. Yeah, the algorithm just couldn't find like a consistent match. It was almost like trying to fit puzzle pieces from two different puzzles together. They just
Wow.
don't align.
Hold on, so you're saying people with different types of color vision might actually be experiencing color in like completely different ways? Like their reds and blues are fundamentally different. That's mind-blowing.
Yeah, it really challenges our assumptions, doesn't it? I mean, we tend to think of color as this like universal experience, but this research is suggesting it might be way more individualized than we even realize.
Okay, I need a minute to process this. So if the algorithm couldn't find a match, what did the individual color maps even look like? Was there anything noticeably
Yep,
different?
absolutely. Yeah, when they visualized the color maps in 3D, like some pretty striking differences emerged. For example, in the color spaces
Hmm.
of people with color blindness, greenish and reddish hues appear much closer together compared to people with typical color vision.
Oh, interesting. So it's not just that they might see specific colors differently, but the entire relationship between colors in their mind is altered. It's like their internal color wheel is organized in a totally different way.
Exactly. And this leads to some really profound questions about the nature of subjective experience. I mean,
Yeah.
does this mean that people with different types of color vision are actually perceiving the world in fundamentally different ways?
Yeah, it's a big question. And to be fair to the researchers, they do acknowledge that just because the maps don't align perfectly, it
Hmm.
doesn't like definitively prove that the experiences are totally different, but it definitely suggests that there's some pretty significant variations in how color is experienced.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder about all the other ways our perceptions might differ,
Mm.
without us even realizing it. Like we're all just walking around with these unique filters that are shaping our reality.
Okay, so I have to ask, what are the implications of this? Beyond just, whoa, colors are weird, does this actually change anything practically?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, think about fields like design and marketing, right? Where color plays such a huge role.
Yeah.
If we're not all experiencing color in the same way, then what we find aesthetically pleasing or calming or exciting might be completely different for someone else.
You're right. A color that evokes a sense of trust and security for me might be totally jarring or off-putting for someone else. This could like completely change how we approach things like branding or website design, even choosing the colors for like a product.
Exactly. And it also highlights the need for more inclusive design practices,
Oh, yeah.
ones that actually take into account the diversity of human experience. Like maybe someday we'll have personalized color palettes for our devices, tailored to our individual qualia structures.
No, that's a cool idea. Imagine being able to like adjust your phone's display so that the colors you see are like perfectly aligned with your own internal experience. That could totally revolutionize how we interact with technology.
It's definitely fascinating to think about all the possibilities. But even without those technological advances, I think the key takeaway here is the importance of recognizing and respecting these individual differences in perception.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that like our way of seeing the world isn't the only way. And that kind of opens up this whole new level of empathy and understanding, don't you think?
Absolutely. This research is really just like scratching the surface.
Yeah.
I can't wait to see what other mysteries about perception we can uncover in the years to come. It makes you wonder if we can have so much variation in something as basic as color perception, right? Like what other hidden differences in experience might be out there.
This whole conversation is kind of reminding me of something that we often take for granted, sound. We talk about audio quality all the time on the show, but what if our experiences of sound are just as individualized as our experiences of color?
That's a great point. We talk about golden ears in the audio world, people with like exceptionally keen hearing. But what if those golden ears are actually experiencing sound in a fundamentally different way than the rest of us?
Yeah, it's like, what if my perfect podcast mix sounds completely different to someone else because their auditory qualia structure is totally different?
It's definitely possible.
Yeah.
Yeah. We know that our auditory experiences are shaped by this really complex interplay of genetics and environment and personal experiences. So the way we perceive music or speech, even like every day, sounds, it could be way more individualized than we realize.
Yeah, this has like huge implications. Just think about how we create and consume audio content. Imagine a world where we had like personalized audio profiles for our headphones, just like you were talking about personalized color palettes for our screens.
Yeah, it's an intriguing thought, isn't it? Like just listening to your favorite music or your favorite podcast tailored to your unique auditory qualia structure.
Wow, that would change everything. But it also kind of raises some questions like if we can personalize our sensory experiences to such a degree, what does that mean for our like shared understanding of the world?
Yeah, it's kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Uh,
On the one hand, the potential for like deeper immersion and like truly personalized experiences is incredibly exciting. But on the other hand, we need to be mindful of the potential consequences for social cohesion and our ability to connect with others.
It's a topic worthy of like a whole other deep dive, don't you think? But for now, I think it's safe to say that this research has given us a lot to ponder.
Absolutely. It's a great reminder that the world we experience is shaped not just by like what's out there, but also by how our brains interpret that information,
Mm.
and those interpretations can be surprisingly diverse, you know?
Yeah, it really is fascinating to think about and also a bit humbling in a way, right? Like we all think we're experiencing the same world, but maybe in reality we're each like living in our own little unique sensory bubble.
Precisely. And as we've been discussing, this has some pretty huge implications, not only for how we understand ourselves, but also for how we interact with each other.
It makes you wonder if like these differences in perception could even be at the root of some misunderstandings and conflicts.
Yeah, it's certainly possible. I mean, imagine trying to describe like a beautiful sunset to someone whose experience of color is totally different from yours, or like trying to share a piece of music that evokes all these like deep emotions in you, but it just falls flat for someone with a different auditory qualia structure.
Yeah, it's like we're speaking different languages even when we're using the same words.
That's a really powerful analogy, and it really highlights the importance of empathy and open-mindedness, in communication.
We need to be way more aware that other people's realities might be very different from our own, even if we don't like fully understand those differences.
Absolutely, and this awareness can help us be more patient, more understanding and more compassionate in our interactions with others.
So all this talk about individual sensory bubbles, it makes me wonder if we could somehow map someone's qualia structure perfectly right. Like, would we actually understand what it's like to experience the world through their eyes?
Ah, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it? It takes us back to those really fundamental philosophical questions about consciousness and subjective experience. Like even with a perfect map, we might still be missing the essence of what it feels like to be that person, to experience the world through their unique lens.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like having all the ingredients for a delicious cake, but not knowing how to actually bake it.
Yeah.
You understand the individual components, but you're missing that like magic that brings it all together.
That's a wonderful analogy, and it perfectly captures the challenge we face in trying to understand consciousness.
Yeah.
We can analyze the brain, we can map the neural pathways, but there's still something ineffable about subjective experience that just like eludes our grasp.
Yeah, it's a mystery that scientists and philosophers have been grappling with for centuries.
And one that will likely continue to fascinate us for many more to come.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap up this deep dive. But before we go, I have one final question for you. If we could somehow experience the world through someone else's senses, right? Like to see their red and hear their music, would it ultimately bring us closer together or just highlight the unbridgeable gap between our own individual realities?
That's a really profound question, and I think the answer might depend on our willingness to embrace those differences.
Yeah.
To see them not as obstacles to understanding, but as opportunities for growth and connection.
I love that perspective. It's a good reminder that even though our perceptions might differ, we can still find common ground, through curiosity and empathy and a shared sense of wonder.
Well said. And on that note, I'd like to thank you and all of our listeners for joining us on this journey into the fascinating world of perception.
It was great having you here, and don't forget to check out the show notes for more information on the research we discussed and some thought-provoking questions to ponder. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.